I'm Donna Phelan. Welcome to Perspective. The Da Vinci Code has enjoyed enormous popularity. In a similar genre, today we're going to take a look at another fascinating historical fiction based on actual characters who not only witnessed the death of Jesus Christ, but played an important role in it and how that changed their lives forever. My guest is Stephen Maines, author of Longinus, Book 1 of the Merlin Factor, and Mirrodin, Book 2 of the Merlin Factor. Welcome, Stephen.
Thank you. Great to be here.
No one would say that the Da Vinci Code is a religious book. Are your books religious?
Well, Book 1, Longinus, is about the Roman centurion who pierced the side of Christ while he hung on the cross. As such, it's not religious, but there is a philosophical subtext going through the book because the story is about his life post-crucifixion and his own inner spiritual awakening. But they're not religious per se, no.
But Longinus was an actual character in history.
He was. He was a documented centurion in the Roman military at that time, yes.
And what rank is centurion?
Centurion is in charge of 100 men, a century of
I
men.
see.
So that was his duty, as it were. But they also had side duties, whether it was escorting prisoners to being crucified or in other contexts as well. So.
It's so fascinating that he was one day a Roman centurion, and he was sort of an accidental legend in the Bible, that he found himself in this experience of the crucifixion of Jesus Christ.
Right. Well, according to history and accounts that I've researched, he was one of the soldiers that was assigned to guard Jesus while he hung on the cross. And it wasn't him at the time that was so much famous, it was his spear that he used to pierce the side of Christ that became famous down through history and was thought to have been, by that event, endowed with powers and magic powers and so on and so forth. And it took on a political fireball of its own, whether it actually contained these powers or not. The fact is, people believed it did. So in that sense, it did have power. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yes, so the spear was actually a part of history.
Exactly.
And not part of just the fictional story.
Exactly. And my first book focuses on the man himself and having this legendary spear, how that affected his life, people believing that it had power. And indeed, he hears a voice that he thinks is coming from the spear, that he thinks is Christ's voice at a certain time. He also questions himself at other times, whether this voice is just something in his head that's making him mad. But through the whole process of that experience, it's about his own inner awakening at the same time after the crucifixion event.
So this experience totally transformed his life.
Absolutely. It absolutely transformed his life. And even to the point that at the end of his life, a lot of people believe he was crucified as a staunch Christian. Now, some of the research I uncovered questions that, but he did end up, in my book, studying with Druids and what they know of the source, God, so on and so forth, and how they apply that to their lives. So regardless of whether he became a Christian or not, it changed his life in that it set his feet on a path of spiritual awakening, so to speak.
And how did the Druids play into that time historically?
The Druids were subjugated people. Well, the Celts were a subjugated people. The Druids, for want of a better word, were the priestly caste, if you will, of the Celts. Now, the Celts at this time were all throughout Europe, or just pre-Roman history, were all throughout Europe, and we think of them today as being in mainly the British Isles, especially Ireland. Well, and the reason for that is that when Julius Caesar swept through Europe and Gaul, what is now France, he basically destroyed most of the Celtic culture, made them a subjugated people, and he didn't push all the way into Britain. He only went through part of Britain. So the Celts that were left intact in their original lifestyle and their culture and so on and so forth remained intact in northern Britain and Ireland especially, but not so in the rest of Europe. So that's where we get this whole idea that the Celts and the Druid culture are only from Britain, but that's not so. The case was that they were all throughout Europe, and some scholars even argue down into Asia Minor as well. So they were prolific. And as I said, the Druids were the priestly caste of the Celts.
So is it your position that the spear had magic powers?
My position is it's up to the individual reader to glean from my story Longinus' story, excuse me, what that magic power is. Because there are certain times when the individual, Longinus, is tapping into the power of the spear, yet he is clearly identifying it as his own power. This is just a hunk of wood and metal, right? But anything that we have in the material sense that we endow with such power has the power because we believe it does. Does that make sense?
Yes.
And other people believed it had power. So in that sense, there's a political power to it.
Right.
So.
And actually, he was dogged by the politicians of the time for the spear, was he not?
He was. There were several accounts of the Roman hierarchy, and especially the Roman priests, who truly believed that the spear had the power, and that they were going after this thing, if you will. A lot of the military wanted it because of the political factor that I just mentioned a moment ago. That if all these people believe it has power, then it has political power. Remove it from the situation, and the power will be gone. So either way, yes, they wanted the spear, period. Mm-hmm. And along with it, Longinus, especially if he knew how to work powers through the spear, as it were. So subsequently, in my story, he ends up leaving the Roman military, going up into Gaul to escape them, and living for a time with a pocket of Celts and Druids that were mainly untouched by the Roman military at that time.
Now, was that historically accurate?
There are several accounts that is what happened to him. As to the actual historical facts of it, that's up in the air. But there's so many accounts that had him doing this, there must be something to it. So when I basically gathered these facts together, these various accounts, I let it come through me, if it will, and just write itself on the page as to this possible story here as to this person's life. So.
Of all the characters of that time that you could have chosen, why did you choose Longinus?
The only way I can really answer that is that he picked me, as it were. When I started writing book one, the protagonist was actually just going to be an average everyday person that was going through some sort of spiritual transformation or inner awakening, whatever you want to call that. But what I was finding was the protagonist wasn't matching a context in history is what I was missing. So I was in a Catholic church one day working on a film, and those of you who are Catholic know that there are various statues and scenes depicting the crucifixion. And one of them, they were pulling Christ down, and he had a wound underneath his ribs. And there was a soldier with a spear standing next to him. And it just jumped out at me that this person's story has not been told. And that's how it came to be. So he became the protagonist of the book I was writing. So.
And that event, which was truly larger than life, the crucifixion of Jesus Christ, set Longinus off on this spiritual journey. Mm-hmm. And how does that mirror your own spiritual journey?
That's interesting. There's a little part of me in all the characters I write. I mean, that's just the way it is. So to say that he is reflective of my own journey on certain levels, that's absolutely true. He constantly questions, he being Longinus, constantly questions his own spirituality, what he's experiencing on that level of being, his awakening and so on and so forth. Yet he takes 2 or 3 steps forward and then falls 2 steps back, so to speak, as we all do. We're saints and sinners in that context, and not always saints. But the point is, he keeps on going. He keeps on the path that he's on. And yes, questions it. Yes, he's still a Roman military guy at heart. But he keeps on the path. So in that sense, it has mirrored my own, because regardless of what so-called obstacles are sent your way in life, you keep going. Mm-hmm. You keep going.
Right.
So.
And along the way, he met all these very interesting characters, very colorful. Jacobi, who was a Jewish rabbi, the Druid masters, and the Celts, who were also quite interesting and all very different.
Right.
Tell us about how they played a role in his transformation, his journey.
I found that when I was writing the book and focusing on Longinus, these characters would start popping in and befriending him in the same way that people were popping into my own life. In the sense of, yes, you become friends with someone and so on and so forth, but there's a context around that friendship. a lot of them, all these characters are there to aid him on his path as he is to aid them in their growth at the same time. It's subtle, it's ongoing, but all these characters are there to support each other. I am focusing on Longinus, but I could have focused on any one of these other characters. And they are, the characters come from quite varied backgrounds too.
Right.
But they're all on the same path together. They're all there to support each other in even what we would call an unconscious way, if that makes sense. It's not overt that they know they're there to support this person, but it's just part and parcel of the relationship at the time.
And they were fictional.
Most of those were fictional. There were a couple of them that are not fictional, but the two characters at Christ's tomb, for example, are not fictional.
Right.
I mean, are not fictional, but their names are different than what their names were in history. So
now Longinus is book 1 of the Merlin Factor trilogy.
Correct.
So what is the Merlin Factor?
The Merlin Factor actually was the initial name of the book, and that refers to as that part within our own nature that I believe to be infinite, okay, to where we can tap into and basically create the life we want to create. I didn't want to use the term Christ consciousness or one's Buddha nature, although that means the same thing, simply because they had too much of a religious overtone to them. There's too many different connotations that come into mind. When I was a kid, I was always fascinated by the figure of Merlin, the magician from King Arthur's court, how anything was possible with this person. And it just dawned on me that we all have our own inner Merlin, so to speak. So that is what the Merlin Factor is tapping into your own inner infinite nature. I call it the Merlin Factor in that sense.
So I have to tell you, I found the ending shocking. Longinus goes through this whole journey, spiritual transformation, which we go right along with him, and that was fascinating. And you get to the end, and it was totally stunning to me. A very shocking ending. Tell us about that.
Well, I don't want to
without giving it away.
Exactly. I don't want to give too much away, but at the same time, look at it as just a stepping stone to the next existence that he has. That ending. That ending too that you're referring to is. There were two things that all the accounts I found agreed upon. That this person, Longinus, did exist, was in fact the person that pierced the side of Christ with a spear, and then the end in the book, where and how, or what happened to him, I should say. Yes, it was shocking, but at the same time, the epilogue sets up book 2, which is also Longinus carrying on his existence into the next expression of his life, his existence, if you will.
And did Longinus make his spiritual journey? Did he have that transformation before the end of the book, do you feel?
I feel he was on the path to it, but I don't think anything's ever complete in that sense, which is why he carried on to in the next book to the character that he becomes in the next book and his next expression of life, so to speak. So he wasn't finished, no, but he did get to a certain level. But at the same time, it goes back to that whole going back and forth, 3 steps forward, 2 steps back kind of thing. His whole life was like that up until the end there. So.
And in just a second, we're going to get to the next book. I can't wait to discuss Mirrodin, book 2 of the Merlin Factor. But we're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back with Stephen Maines, author of Longinus, book 1 of the Merlin Factor, and Mirrodin, book 2 of the Merlin Factor.